Berries to catch or kids to pick up, so please don't worry. I won't be offended if you need to sneak out. That's just fine. You know, as we've covered, I've written a lot of cookbooks, but the two things that really come to mind as we talk is the impact of making a place through food on this island. And it's been through the people that I've met. Two of them are sitting right here, Kevin and Keisha. And Paul DeMaine and Carol and people that I know from the community garden, that I've really begun to understand how food builds communities. So to that end, my son Kip and I, who's also been really involved in the community garden and a lot of other things on the island, and I decided to co-author a sequel to a book I wrote years ago called In Winter's Kitchen, which focuses on my journey here from the East Coast and connecting with people in our local food shed to understand where that food came from, because in working with the previous book, Lucia Watson of Lucia's Restaurant, I saw how where food comes from and how it's grown greatly affects flavor. And so that got me interested in this, like, why does this taste good? What's going on with it? Why do I feel better when I eat it? All that kind of stuff. Then I met Sean Sherman, who sort of opened my eyes to the fact that we walk over so much food every day, okay? And then through a number of people on the island, I learned to forage and to start really paying attention to what was under my feet. That then led me to exploring the impact of soil on our food. You know, how it influences not only its flavor, but its nutrients and what happens to our land. And in doing that, I connected with the University of Minnesota, which hosts the Forever Green Initiative that's deeply connected to the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas. Are people familiar with Wes Jackson? Good friend of Wendell Berry's and a number of sort of these philosopher farmers who have done great things around trying to figure out how to grow food in ways that don't destroy our land and our ecology. And so that led to Perennial Kitchen, which is about the work of regenerative agriculture to plant more perennials and to keep continuous living cover on the land to nourish the soil after food is harvested. So I'm going to pull things from the book that Kip and I are working on, because I could go on and on about the philosophy and the vision behind all this and all the great people that are writing about this, but I want to tell you my story, and I'm hoping that you relate to it as your story too. All right, and this is coming from the introduction of the book that's going to be called In Summer's Kitchen. Okay, as I write this from the porch of our family cottage on Lake Superior, a blueberry pie cools on the counter and ratatouille simmers on the stove. For most of my adult life, I've been the sole cook in the Dooley household. But the blueberries I picked early this morning inspired Allie, my son Kip's wife, to make the buttery, flaky pie crust she learned as a child from her Grammy Margot. Kip harvested the tomatoes, eggplant, and zucchini and garlic from the Madeline Island Community Garden and promptly shooed me back to the porch when I tried to begin chopping them for the ratatouille. "Mom, I know how to do it," he said. 7 words all mothers must eventually, if grudgingly, learn to accept. I've been coming to this island for over 40 years. It's the ancestral home of the Anishinaabe, or Ojibwe people, who came here over 500 years ago in search of a prophesied land where food grows on water. The wild rice they discovered in the lakes and sloughs of this region, along with the maple sugar, fish, and animal pelts, became the basis of their civilization, and later, the lucrative trade networks that fueled the French, English, and U.S. empires. The land's clear air, cool nights, thick forests, and pine and maple, and wide views of the majestic lakes still the heart and quicken the mind and the appetite. Our cottage was built in 1903 as part of a retreat for Congregationalist ministers. The cooking back then was usually done in a separate building that multiple summer households shared called the Summer Kitchen. It was here, away from the commotion of family that set cooks to their work during the quiet morning hours before the heat of the day. I've come to think of this cottage as my own summer kitchen, a space apart from ordinary time and the busyness of city life, where I can more fully immerse myself in the daily rituals of preparing, sharing, and learning about food. It's both a retreat and a classroom, where as a mom, cook, and food writer, I've learned my lessons about how my choices impact the Great Lake. Its wildlife, its neighbors, and where I've been fortunate to connect with Indigenous neighbors and find simple ways to support a burgeoning movement to restore Native people's rightful place on their sacred land. And it's where I've watched my sons, the carriers of this legacy, play, grow, and deepen their connection to land and to food. As I close in on the final chapter of my working life, I'm thinking about what I want to leave behind. While I'm proud of the many books and the articles I've written, I've long ago given up any illusion that my words will be studied or savored for generations to come. No Robin Wall Kimmerer and no MFK Fisher, and that's okay. There's a dawning sense within me, strange and familiar and quietly thrilling, that my legacy will have to do, instead, with soil. It's a bit humbling to come to this conclusion, not to mention perplexing, given our own antagonistic relationship with soil. We work hard to keep our hands and homes free of it, sweeping and mopping and spraying away any trace of the stuff our food grows in. Yet soil is life. Just 1 teaspoon of backyard dirt contains billions of organisms, as alive as you or me, or any animal with whom we share this planet. Consider that the Latin term humus, humus, the linguistic root of human, literally means soil. In Hebrew, a root language of our Judeo-Christian culture, Adam, the word for person or man, is derived from Adama, soil or earth. For the past 60 years in the US at least, the study of soil has been cordoned off in the natural sciences. My own entry point to this topic is less detached and precise domain, that of cooking. The stories we'll offer here, contextualized by the research of scientists and the diligent and often thankless work of farmers and growers, flows from my own personal experience of preparing food and gathering people to share meals. I have little new to say about the big picture policy solutions, but lots to share with the curious home cook who wishes to find a deeper sense of connection to the land and to others while doing their own small part to build a healthy, collective future. Western science has long treated soil as just another lifeless input in the machine of nature, measuring its value by numbers and outputs. Seed and fertilizer companies, with the full support of the US government, have made spraying chemical fertilizers, continuous tilling, and large-scale monocropping of corn and soy the norm in agriculture. North America's soil, which was once one of the most nutrient-rich in the world, has suffered greatly for it. According to a 2022 study, the upper Midwest is losing valuable topsoil at the rate of 1.9 millimeters per year, which sounds minuscule to the human world of meters and miles, but which is seismic realm of soil-based ecosystems. As the late Dr. Don Wise, the founder of the Forever Green Initiative, who I talk about later in the book, said, land is losing its living cover. Soil is to land what skin is to humans. Without it, the land's nutrients are washed out into streams and eventually rivers like the Mississippi and into lakes like the Great Lakes Superior. We'd like to think of the Northern Heartland as America's breadbasket, but one of our other greatest exports, exologically speaking, is phosphorus and nitrogen from chemical fertilizers that washes into the Gulf of Mexico, creating the infamous dead zone, nearly 8,000 square miles of coastline where underwater life has ceased to exist. Only recently has Western science begun to catch up with what indigenous cultures have known for thousands of years, that the way we tend our soil has profound and far-reaching effects, not just on crop output, but on entire systems of human and environmental health. Complex and ever-unfolding, traditional ecological knowledge brings to light just how profoundly we need to change how we tend our land, grow our food, and conceptualize and build community. Technology alone will not solve the climate crisis, and our fixation on West's bright light of progress is in part what drives it. Solutions to the many interlocking political and ecological crises we now face must be grown by reestablishing relationship, and soil, composed of complex and interlocking interactions between plants, microbes, insects, and countless other species, is the perfect guide and metaphor for this journey. The act of cooking is a key nutrient in my own soil. As lucky as I am to write about food, farms, and chefs for a living, it's when someone asks me what's for dinner that I truly come alive. I close my laptop, head to the stove, chop and simmer. Food is no longer words on the screen, but an aromatic and central experience, a creative expression of the earth's unrequited gifts that I get to share with family and friends. A farmer once told me that as he packs each week's CSA, and actually that was Tommy Galazin, his raspberries he had up there, strawberries he had in the bowl, in Sarah's beautiful bowl that she made. He pictures the faces of the families who will receive it. A cheesemaker friend does not permit me or anyone else to smooth the curds after scooping them into their form. I need to give each will a blessing. Such ritual acts name and affirm the invisible latticework of energetic relationships between all the beings that make up our food system: animals, microbes, humans, plants, rocks, water. Our ability to respond to the climate crisis depends not on technological ingenuity, but on the quality of these relationships, the soil from which we feel, think, and take actions, not as masters of the earth and its creatures, but as their siblings, partners, and children. And then I just wanted to continue and say, the Northern Heartland, my adopted home, hosts a rich inheritance of European folk traditions, just like these, many of what would now call regenerative agriculture or sustainable agriculture. Early farmers planted areas of diverse grains, heritage varieties of wheat, rye, oats, buckwheat, and barley, berry bushes and hazelnuts, apple, cherry, plum, and pear trees, beans, peas, tomatoes, eggplant, squash, cucumbers, radishes, we know them all. They all provided food throughout the year, and the precious living cover that Don Wise preached. The trees and bushes especially provided forage and shelter for wildlife, pollinators, and friendly pests. Animals gazed on pasture, turning up soil with their hooves and providing valuable nutrients in the form of manure. It's my contention that much of our work today as European descended people lies in reclaiming the wisdom of our own ancestral cultures while learning from and sharing with indigenous peoples. In this exchange, there's hope that we might restore our connection with the Earth's natural cycles and establish patterns of relating with the Earth and other people that will set our descendants on a better path than the ones we came from. So the book that I'm working on is an experimental journey of reconnection and regeneration. And in this book, we'll walk together with Kip and me through fields with farmers and plant researchers, testing ways to grow food at scale that not only avoids further harm, but revitalizes our once vibrant prairies. You'll accompany us on visits to restaurants and gardens and community centers where chefs, farmers, teachers, advocates who represent the rich ethnic diversity of our region are weaving the ancient wisdom of their cultures with modern technology to grow, cook, and share food in ways that revitalize and restore our lands and, more importantly, our relationships. You'll join us at the stove as we tinker with sauces and experiment with lesser-known vegetables, field-grown and forage, and craft simple, hearty meals of wild rice and fresh fish, harvested by Anishinaabe friends and neighbors. You'll watch us stumble our way through fermenting sauerkraut while seeking reconnection with European folkways, and you'll learn what food sovereignty might look like on a small island in the middle of Lake Superior, where the growing season is but 6 weeks out of the year. So, anyway, that's kind of, what I've been exploring. And I thought, a really perfect metaphor for what's happening here is wild rice. And so I thought if you'll indulge me a little further, and let me know if you're getting bored, okay? I'm happy to cut this short. And I don't want to go over time either. So somebody, Pixie or Carol or somebody can go, when you're ready. Okay. I only began to understand the Northern Heartland when I learned how to cook manoman, wild rice. This morning I set a small pot to boil and pass a handful of the dusty, long grains into the water before heading to the porch to write. Its earthy aromas carry the rich fecundity of Woodland Lake and the shuttle of cattails, the groans of frogs, the eerie grace of a heron taking flight. They all accompany me and my pen, evoking memories, ideas, and friends. I've been ricing a few times in my life, just a few times, as a guest of an elder tribal member or a friend of a local tribe. But local, by law, can only be harvested by hand in a non-motorized boat, usually a canoe. One person pulls from the back, pushing off the shallow, muddy lake bottom to guide the boat through the reeds, while another taps the plants as they pass with thin wood knockers, about 3 foot in length. The grains held in husks fall into the boat, with a good many falling back into the lake, feeding fish and wildlife, and seeding the next crop. As ricers gather, they sow. If you shop at co-ops or health food stores in this region, you'll know wild rice's many virtues as a gluten-free, protein-rich, easy-to-cook whole grain. It's sold in flour mixes, packaged pilafs, puffed chips, and more. This was not always the case. When my husband Kevin and I first moved to Minnesota from New Jersey, I found wild rice only on occasion, usually brewed in soups or stews, its noticeable qualities being its long grain and chewy texture. Most of this was not true wild rice, but commercialized hybrids grown in flooded fields and harvested by machines that saturated the market during the post-1960s health food craze. I learned about wild rice from a cantankerous old man named Tommy Benham. Remember Tommy, right? It was the early 1990s, and I was staying with my 3 young boys on Madeline Island for a few weeks in August, laboring during odd hours to do research for my first book project, Savoring the Seasons of the Northern Heartland, with Chef Lucia Watson. We were staying in a rented cottage at the base of a gentle slope called Mission Hill, just past the Madeline Island Marina, which carries you away from town and towards a favorite beach on the island's southwestern tip, Grants Point. I brought a stack of books for research, which seemed to taunt me each time I walked past them to join the boys down at the dock. At the top of the stack was Wild Rice and the Ojibwe people, the first in-depth academic study of wild rice conducted by a Western anthropologist. In a bizarre stroke of luck, later I learned to call island magic, I would meet the author, Tommy Benham himself, that very week at a restaurant on Mission Hill called the Clubhouse. Tom's reputation preceded him. The black sheep of a prominent Minneapolis family, he journeyed through many cultures in the 1960s and 70s as a kind of gonzo anthropologist, circling Ojibwe drumming and wild rice traditions, Haitian folk magic, and most famously, a mission led by Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead to build the world's biggest drum. As I was introduced from him, he did not rise from his seat, but merely turned his head up towards me. His round spectacles, short hook nose, and intense gaze called to mind an osprey. I told him that I had his book on wild rice with me at the cottage and confessed I'd been too busy with the boys to crack it open. He grunted. Kids are a lot of fun, but make it damn hard to get any work done. Why don't you come down to my place tomorrow for coffee and I'll tell you what's in the book. You don't have to read it. So Tommy. The next day I'd like to meet him in his cabin, a low one-story structure that he had designed himself, using the mission cottages as a template. I gently opened the screen door and called hello. I'm on the porch, he bellowed. Come around the side. I found Tom facing the water, scratching notes on a yellow legal pad. Help yourself, he said, nodding to the silver pot of coffee on the table. Do you always write by hand, I asked. I noticed his left hand was balled tightly in a fist. I can't type anymore, he replied. Tom had MS, which would eventually confine him to a wheelchair, though it did not stop him from making an annual pilgrimage to Pamplona, Spain, in brazen defiance of his doctor's orders to see the bullfights. So what do you want to know about wild rice, he said, finishing the last of his scribbled sentences. Well, I'm interested in how to use it for home cooking, he ventured, but it's also its history and how it's harvested. I can't tell you much about home cooking, he said, but the first thing you ought to know about wild rice is that it's a lot more than food to the Ojibwe. For people like you and me, whites, Euros, whatever you want to call us, food is just something we eat 3 times a day while we go about our business. You could say that wild rice is core to the Ojibwe way of life, but that sounds too wishy-washy. You could say it's part of their religion, which is true, but religion implies something separate from everyday life. Ceremonies, church services. That's not it either. It's more fundamental than that. Wild rice is the reason the Ojibwe came here in the first place. Yeah, I've heard about that, I said, like a student eager to show she's done at least some reading. There was a prophecy, right? He nodded. The Anishinaabe came from the East Coast. Probably that's now New England. The prophecy said to go west until they reached the Great Lakes. Not quite. The prophecy said, go west until you reach the land where food grows on water. He explained how the Anishinaabe settled the shores of the Great Lakes and moved farther into the woodlands of what came to be called northern Wisconsin and Minnesota. Manoban became central to daily life as food, medicine, and sacrament. I think about it this way, Tom said. For Christians, the greatest gift from God is the Bible, the written word, ideas, laws. For the Anishinaabe, the greatest gift from the Creator is the land itself, and rice is at the center of it. Theologian and activist Vinnie Deloria Jr. articulates this contrast as one between indigenous religions of place, relationship, and specificity, and European religions of time, ideas, and claims of universal truth. American Indians hold their lands, places, as having the highest possible meaning, and all their statements are made with this reference point in mind. European immigrants review the movement of their ancestors across the continent as a steady progression of basically good events and experiences, thereby placing history, time, in the best possible light. If the place where food grows on water is the site of ultimate religious meaning for the Anishinaabe, then that food, the good berry, is the arbiter of human-land relationships, and therefore the human-creator relationship. On the walls of Tom's cottage hung original maps of the island, hand drums, wild rice knockers, and long wooden staffs with what looked like dream catchers at the end of them. Lacrosse sticks, said Tommy, noticing my gaze, the subject of his most recent book. Lacrosse, Little Brother of War, was the first Western academic book on the Native American roots of a fast-growing modern game. Tommy's specialty was ethnomusicology, the study of culture through music. And while studying native drums, he learned that many of the same woods, hickory, basswood, ash, were used to make rice knockers and lacrosse sticks. Tommy followed the trees. So, as that, this is so Tommy, as that visit wound down, I said to Tommy, so how do I cook this? He handed the bag of rice to me and he said, and that bag was harvested by one of his friends at the end of the Red Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota. So how should I ask it? How should I cook it? I asked. He shrugged and said, boil it. So and then, okay, how you guys doing? How am I doing on time?
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so the thing about the island is times and generations kind of tumbled together. The other person who really influenced me and sort of became a grandmother mentor was Nusi Meach, whose cottage we now own. So I bumped into her on Grants Point when my kids were really little. We chatted while searching for the lake washed agates, and she, perhaps noticing my hands full with 3 boys, invited us all back to her cottage. On a broad-shouldered Mission Hill porch that faced the lake, she served us iced tea and lemon-berry pound cake. She fetched a shoebox from under one of the beds, opened it to reveal a collection of bugs, moths, spiders, a monarch, each one hat-pinned and labeled. The boys were transfixed. Nusi's taste was eclectic. On the cottage walls hung hand drums she collected on her travels across the world. My teacup played God Save the Queen every time I sipped. Over several summers, she showed us the best places to find berries. She would call us over to harvest orange chanterelle mushrooms that sometimes appeared after a soft rain on mossy patches near her porch. We loved swimming off her dock. Several years later, while canoeing on the Broad River, and you probably all know this if you knew her, Nusi was struck by a massive tree branch and killed. It was surely horrible for her daughter and friend who were with her. I don't know how her family feels about the way she went, but I have to believe it was a good death, doing what she loved out there in the elements. In 2005, we had the good fortune to purchase the Meach cottage from Nusi's son. We repainted some walls and replaced some pipes and gutters, but made sure to leave Nusi's and her family's mark. A favorite piece was an antique ceramic and steel faucet curiously affixed to the wall on the screen porch. Nusi told guests it ran not water, but hot and cold gin. and under inspection, we always delight in encouraging guests to inspect it more closely. One finds the thing merely hanging on 2 rusty nails. More importantly, we left the many circle marks on the pine door frame of our bedroom with children's names beside them, chronicling their height year after year. So our cottage sits on a low row of summer homes known as Mission Hill. And there's you may also know this, cottage owners, renters, and visitors from town are welcome to roam freely along the highly maintained walking path between the cottages and the lakeshore that's zoned as public easement, akin to a road or sidewalk. It's the aspect of our Mission Hill we hold most dear, especially in an age where walking too close to someone else's property can get you shot. One August evening in 2011, when Kip was a college student, a scruffy, barefooted boy in swim trunks scampered up the walking path and across our lawn, right up to the screen porch. "Hey," he said to Kip, whose head was in a book, "that's not your house." The boy's mother soon followed, calling out her apologies. She introduced herself as Annie and explained that her family once owned the place. We knew at a glance that she was Lucy's granddaughter. We invited them in and showed them around, watching with sweet recognition spread across Annie's face when she saw Lucy's Japanese rice bowls drying on the dish rack. We shared a good laugh about the gin faucet and penciled her son's height on the bedroom door frame. We exchanged phone numbers and, just as Lucy would, insisted they come back for the same kind of lemon blueberry pound cake and iced tea. That little Meech boy's opening salvo, "That's not your house," sticks with me. Sure, the place is our house, legally speaking. We pay the taxes and the water bill. We pay carpenters and masons to ensure the little cottage doesn't slide into the lake. And we own the deed to the house. But in a bigger sense, it's not ours. Nor it's not really ours exclusively anyway. In a bigger sense that stretches beyond the human constructs of ownership and linear time, the house belongs to a sprawling network of beings. Humans are just one part of it. The house's wood floors, the walls belong to the oak and pine forests that surround us, and underneath is home to countless bugs and occasional rodents. On quiet mornings, I can feel the presence of the craftspeople who built it back in 1903, and through its charm and its character now include the Dooleys, its vibrancy, its essence was there long before we came, and is the very thing that made us fall in love with this place the morning I and my boys met Lucy. Up the dirt drive toward the main road between drooping pines lie sunken gravestones from the Methodist mission of the late 1700s. When I traipse back there with my dog, I'm always reminded of a favorite folk song by local musician Warren Nelson. "We'll dance with the ghosts of old New France, on the island, on the rock, on the shores of old time." So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop there because I want to leave time for questions and discussion. And I don't want to hold you too long. It's so beautiful out. So yeah, but really, I mean, everybody who comes to this place, who stays here, really feels its magic, right? And there is something about the lake and the fact that we're on an island that makes us so interdependent that we really rely on each other in ways that we don't in the city. And you can feel it. And there are a couple of different instances in that. There's the work that Kevin and Keisha are doing to restore corn, the Iwaki project. There's the work that that's going on in the community garden, which is, tremendous. I mean, it's, and you guys all know the story of the garden, right? Well, so it's so interesting. The garden was created because there was a big brouhaha around abandoned cars on the island, and it created a number of factions, which you can also feel that on a small island. I mean, you can't just walk away from somebody you're mad at. You're going to see them in the pub or on the ferry or something, and those things kind of get agitated and stir up. So it was decided, Marina was a big part of this, it was decided that if we had a community garden, people would want to come out and work together. And it was that simple work that brought them together. And as a result, that garden then not only fed people who like to garden and like to teach each other how to garden. I've learned a lot about going over there, and I need to put a caveat around that. I can talk about food. I'm a pretty good cook, but I'm a much better shopper, and my gardening relies on the people that show me what to do. Anyway, so that's how the garden was founded, and that was probably, I think, about 15 or 20 years ago. It's been around for a while. Yeah, and it gets better and better every year. And it's gone through different garden managers. It goes up and down like most of those, community initiatives. But it's still a really important presence, and it's where people come together and meet each other that might not otherwise. Same thing with the Clay Center, the Mission Hill, where people can come and learn how to make bowls and understand the aspects of clay and things like that. And then Penelise and her family have the garden that used to be Marty Curry's farm, and they're using the Three Sisters method of growing corn, beans, and squash, and it's really a beautiful place. They've done a lot of work to clean that up. So that, and of course there's our community center, which used to be called the Dump, so which is great because it's the ecosystem of the neighborhood. Things just keep coming around, and I don't know. I find that part of the island magic. So this is you already know this. I don't need to tell you this, but I'd love to engage you in discussion or answer questions or whatever. Yeah, Dixie.
So Beth, I think first of all it's fascinating, and I love your writing. So this is a real gift. But you talk about the production, the finding, the making. But for me, the building a community around food is the eating of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you going to cover that in your book?
Yes, for sure. There'll be recipes.
Okay.
And, there'll be guides to, it'll be, we'll have, in Winter's Kitchen has a lot of these interviews and a lot of the stories, and a lot of what goes on when people sit down over dinner and things like that. But yeah, there'll be recipes, and we always put those in the back of the book. So if you're not so interested in the front part, you just go right to the back, and then you know where things are. So, and those will be recipes for the things that I mentioned in the book, for wild rice, and for, corn, and for how corn is nixtamalized, and things like that. So, yeah, great question, thanks, yeah. Other questions? Yes, yeah.
And I have a question. What with populations growing, changes in food, what are the trends that you're seeing? Nationally, internationally, whatever.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. What's really interesting to me is there's finally an acknowledgement and interest in regenerative agriculture. One of the issues around regenerative agriculture is like any sort of label that then tries to define a commercialized product. It's sketchy. It really doesn't have a definition. And not to get too esoteric, but years ago, the organic label meant something much different. Years ago, the organic label, there was a very good one out of Portland, and there was out of Washington, not Portland, out of Washington and Oregon. They had the TIF certification, and that was what Minnesota used, and then Wisconsin picked up. So every state had their own organic certification. What that spoke to was not so much whether or not the farmer was using chemicals. What it spoke to was how that soil was treated and how that food was grown. So those inspectors in those different states came out and checked not only whether or not the farmer was using inputs, and many of them didn't because they were farming in ways that they were rotating crops. So what went in one, for the first couple of weeks would come out and something else would be planted. That had more to do with organic certification. When the National Organic Standard came in, which is great because it means if I go to a state I'm not familiar with, I can be assured that chemicals aren't used on that food. But it doesn't speak to how that food is grown. So as a result, if you're buying lettuce out of California, for instance, which is great, it's not sprayed with chemicals, and the soil isn't being treated with anything. But what's happening there is that lettuce is being grown in quantity and ripped up and replanted every couple of weeks. Okay, and that's really hard on the soil. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. And so the work being done at the university level to try and provide some sort of interim solution to large farmers in regenerative agriculture is the hybridization of plants that can be perennialized. Plants that used to be, monocropped, like corn and soy, can now have a third crop rotation with wheat or with other crops. And, it's about encouraging farmers to plant things like alfalfa or buckwheat or crops that can hold the soil in the ground so they don't get ripped up. And then also because they return nutrients to the soil in those rotations, require far less chemicals. The other thing that's happening is that University of Minnesota and the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas are hybridizing, which is not GMO, it just means they're crossing plants, right, to become perennial. So wheat, for instance, is kind of the poster child for regenerative agriculture. And there is a variety now called Kernza, which is a cousin of annual wheat that's being grown in wheat growing areas instead of wheat or with wheat, that sinks its roots way down into the ground, like 20 feet down, so that it doesn't, and it also doesn't need to be sprayed that way. It will, like our grass, it will come back every year. And the benefit of that is because those tap roots go so far down, they're not vulnerable to droughts, and they're not vulnerable to heavy rains. They also capture a lot of carbon because those crops are among the best carbon captures. So that's another sort of solution. There's no magic bullet to any of this, and the other thing is, we need to remember, as much as, we just do, is that those large farmers are businessmen, and we can't just expect them to change their, the way they grow food, because they've invested deeply in, equipment and in seeds and things like that. We need to give them something else to grow. And we need to support their different ways of growing it. As a result, large companies like Patagonia, for instance, have gotten behind Kernza. So they're using Kernza in granola bars. They're using it in a flour mix called climate-friendly flour. They're using, now there isn't a whole lot of it because it's still early and it's difficult to get farmers to adapt it, because they risk, when they grow Kernza, they risk losing some of their commodity price supports. That's the other thing. They're functioning under the weight of these federal entitlements, commodity price supports, and crop loss insurance. So they're not protected. They can't take on the risks that our corn and soy farmers do. And 98% of our land, farming land, is covered in corn and soy. So that's the big thing. Yeah.
How much of the production now is, when you really peel back the layers, is corporate farming driven by Cargill and the big grain companies, and and there's a whole beef and dairy world too that's fed by the corn, but generally now drifting to much bigger corporate.
Yep, and it's all getting consolidated, and that's huge. It's a big problem, and a lot of those companies are now international, or their headquarters are in different countries that don't have the same tax laws that we do. Minnesota's lucky, although it seldom is enforced, in that corporations can't be landowners, but they're then shell companies. So, they basically are paying people to farm for them, right? So there's that. There are all kinds of loopholes in that. So it's it sounds really dire, but there is this work being done, and that's what I'm most interested in. It's like, so what really is going on? Do we have to just kind of be Chicken Little and run around and say, oh God, the big guys are horrible? Because you don't see that going on here, right? Sure, I'll go and pick up stuff at the co-op or, wherever and bring it up here. But there's a lot of food that we can find here or grow here. And just more, it's the awareness of the impact that those practices have on the environment that kind of are in the back of my mind when I think about food. So, but it is, it's like we need to become a better informed public, and we can also hold our policymakers and politicians accountable for making those decisions. The Farm Bill is coming up again this year, and I don't know if we're going to see much change under Trump, but, that's all lobbying efforts, right? And, I don't know. So, I'm not going to see the changes I want to see in my lifetime. That horse left the barn a long time ago. But I think there are. I think the closing of the Strait of Hormuz is going to put shockwaves into a lot of our systems we take for granted. So anyway, thanks. Yes.
I'm curious about foraging on the island and what you find without giving away any secrets.
Oh, there are no secrets. I sort of stumble on things. I think Kevin could probably tell you more. I have a good friend, Jeff Shapiro, who is a fabulous mushroomer. So, and I keep telling him he needs to give more guided tours. And then the woman who, yes, thank you, Samantha Dobson's incredible, and she hosts.
She is really incredible.
She's great, and she guides for the wilderness preserve. She guides, foraging expeditions and stuff. She's amazing. So you'd be surprised at how much you can find, and Samantha's great at that. So yeah, and I can hook you up with Jeff anytime. So yeah, great question. Yeah.
So what other things do you forage for other than mushrooms?
There's it's really just mushrooms, to be honest. But I do use cedar for tea, right? And then if you can find juniper, it makes a really nice seasoning for meat and things like that. They're wild cranberries, and they're also any of the wild berries you can use, and then wild elderberries. And actually, Leslie Matt is growing elderberries, and those are fabulous, and they're super healthy. Yeah. So I'm trying to think. That's right. Kevin can probably.
Milkweed's good, right? We're probably just past Acacia gathered milkweed buds.
Yes. Oh, milkweed. Yeah, are you doing that?
Yeah, so the milkweed buds are fantastic for soup.
Yeah.
Real similar to like a broccoli soup.
Great, that's wonderful. And you get them when they're young, right?
Yeah, when they're young, and you just want to make sure that you're not taking too much off one plant because you want to make sure the monarchs have ample amount. There's a ton of different, wild foods all over the island.
What about nettle?
Nettle, yeah.
Yeah,
Nettle's great. But again, you want to get it kind of early. You've got to wear gloves.
Yes.
But yeah, no, thank you, milkweed buds. And also, that's the other thing about foraging. Don't take everything because you need to leave some that'll come back, especially mushrooms, because you want them to come back. Yeah, no, that's great. And cattail. Do you guys do cattail too? I'm too scared to mess around with that.
I've done things with cattail pollen. I've done things with the roots. One of the concerns with cattails that I have is that they absorb toxins out of the environment. So they're really good for that, but the problem is when you're eating those concentrated.
Right.
I've also found that, as far as every part of cattail is edible.
Yeah.
That being said, on a level of deliciousness,
Yeah.
I think it's pretty baseline. A lot of the things that we've been getting into as far as wild foods and working with and exploring is like the ojia bun or the inner bark, food. So like the birch, and then this year we're doing white pine or flower as well.
Nice, because you need birch cookies from there, right? Yes, one of the gatherings. So that's super interesting as well. Yeah, thanks. So there's a lot. You just need to find people that know where it is and what to do with it when you do.
I'd add into that if I may. A
Yeah.
lot of it being like the dipping of the toe tends to be teas. And so that's one of the initiatives of us for the Madeline Island Community Garden. I'm on the board, and it's looking at where our threshold is of engaging communities. So we've been embracing more of educating, but then how can we seed share and seed keep and encourage, like for someone like yourselves to grow at home, and then and how does that affect the ecosystem and then our soil health? So everything's really small at this point.
Yeah, but that's great.
And the last one would be edible flowers.
Yes.
And that just makes everything beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. It does in roses too, right? Yeah.
So, can you name some of those, Kisha? What are some of the edible flowers that we should be trying out?
I've been I actually turned to Kevin because in our front yard we have tiny blue flowers. Do you know what they're called?
Violets.
They are tiny violets.
Yeah, all the violets are edible. Yeah.
And they're beautiful.
Yeah.
A lot of rosehip flowers, elderberry. You harvested for us before you returned back.
Oh yeah, so a couple of things which are flowering right now. I don't know here if the elderflowers are out yet. They should be. I picked some south of here about a week ago. And so elderflower is really amazing as a tea, incredible. And my favorite, and I just saw it on the island, they were flowering. I was just going to tell Keisha that, and I didn't get a chance to tell her now, so I get tired. The basswoods are flowering.
That's very
So
exciting.
if you've ever had, like in Europe, linden tea is a big deal, or basswood honey, that is a really incredible flavor. And the basswoods are just abundant with the flowers right now. And so on a giant basswood tree, you're only going to reach the ones, you're like the deer, you're only going to get the ones at the bottom and won't hurt the tree.
Or you see Kevin and I with like someone on each other's shoulder.
I just want the big one up here.
But that brings up all the tapping and syrup making.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Maple, and there's there's also birch. Do you guys do birch there?
Yeah, we do
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, which is really interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's more like, yeah.
So do you, Beth, and the community garden people and other people who have farms here, do you all think that at some point we will be a self-sustaining island for food? I mean, obviously, you know, the need in the summer is exponential. You know, I'm just so curious.
Yeah. I mean, we could, you know, if we really put our minds to it. I mean, this used to have a number of dairy farms, right? And I remember there was something like 400 or 500 dairy farms, including Madeline Island, throughout the Bayfield, Washburn, Corny area. And those all, and again, you know, the dairy industry got hit so hard. But what we're seeing is a lot of those now are, you know, granted it's touristy, but the orchards and the Jason Fishbach is the extension agent who's working to get more hazelnuts in, you know, yeah, he's at the University of Minnesota. He's great. His wife has the flower share, a beautiful CSA flower share, and he's really interested in what that hazelnut industry could look like. I mean, part of it is it will, if we can get more people, not only people that are growing this food for community and themselves, but trying to figure out how to reinvigorate some sort of food economy on the island as well, so that people are interested in doing it in a significant way, so that again it returns not only the community aspect to it, but an economic, you know, that we can make it economically viable, and that's what Jason's working really hard on. And there's that, it's the CSA, the Bayfield Food CSA and stuff, which is I think done pretty well so far. And then, you know, Tommy and Ann have made a stab at it. They're probably the best growers I've ever met. They're phenomenal, and they're completely off the grid. I mean, they're, you know, not everybody's going to be able to adopt what they do, but the amount of food that comes out of that little plot is astounding. I mean, I'd love to know what the
Where
tonnage
is it in Bayfield?
Yeah, it's Northwind's
Yeah.
Organic Farm.
Yeah.
But if you look at what they're doing and how they're doing it, there is the potential. If somebody's really interested in doing that, they could probably do that here. You know, and he has that little farmer's market down at the,
Right,
yeah, down at
Friday mornings.
Yes, that's right, across from the ferry dock. And they also have a CSA, yeah. So, yeah, Dixie.
So, Barb Coffin, who is very involved in this group, talks about the research that had been done about potato growing on the island. What can you help us understand about
Well, I know
that?
we've got
I
grants
feel,
for that.
I feel Brian's gonna do that.
Are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Funny days,
Yeah.
really funny.
You know, I know that on Kennelis's land, on Marty's Hill Farm, they grow astounding potatoes.
Maddie?
They're great. And I think maybe
What?
there were some farmers that were growing potatoes here years ago to send over to the mainland. You know, because I think, you know, it all has to do with the soil. If the soil
Right.
is well maintained, because they had animals, that's the other thing. Because the animals enrich the soil.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In their own way.
In their own way.
Yeah.
You can do a whole rewilding.
No, totally.
Yes.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean,
So
it could.
cool.
Again, it's the desire to do that, you know, and just the buy-in to it, and also the willingness to buck a lot of forces and the weather, right? But potatoes are a great crop because you can store them, right? You know, so there are all kinds of things, and probably potatoes grow well. I know that other root vegetables grow well as well. So we've had great carrots and stuff like that. So
It's
yeah,
cultural.
yeah. Oh yeah.
A couple of curiosities I have about the island food systems and related to soil on the
Yeah.
island, and I don't have the answers, but I'm very curious. One is that the fire that happened here on the island around the turn of the century, from what Paul Domain and others have said about it, is that it was one of the, if not the hottest fire in Wisconsin history.
Wow.
It happened a few years after the island had heavily been logged.
Yeah.
So there was a tremendous amount of like all of the branches and scrap
Yeah.
wood, it was just everywhere. Started on the north end,
Yeah.
and from what Paul has said, that it burned the topsoil. So the topsoil, there was 6 to 8 inches of topsoil on most of the island, including a lot of foundations burned.
Okay.
And then,
Okay.
so I think that, you know, our soil is probably different than,
Yeah.
because we try to understand that with growing corn. There's a lot of
Yeah.
corn grown here historically.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious what the difference there. And the next piece that I think is interesting and it's related is the work that Damon Panic has done on the islands with controlled burns.
Yes.
And what he has said is that up until he's taken core samples out of big red pines on the Coastal Islands, and up until 1855 there was regular burns that were happening on the islands, and so these burns they prevent major fires, but they're also contributing a significant amount of charcoal into the soil, and this is soil building. And the other thing about that is that when the forests in this area are maintained by these low burns, what you're doing is you're eliminating a lot of the undergrowth and small trees, but you're creating massive amounts of food for people.
Right.
So what comes up are huge blueberry populations and young succulent plants. So your deer populations go sky high. And so I wonder about that as far as in our forest management, because we have pretty low blueberry population right now.
Yep. That's fascinating. That's really interesting. Yeah.
You had asked a question about the system, and as we've mapped it out, it's the long trajectory. So I've met with Jay, who's the chief of fire, because we've written for this work, and we're gearing up to start encouraging private homeowners to be able to move out of an emotional bias which says burning, how could I ever, and say, well, if we have partnership, this will lead to, because one of the trajectories that we're having to consider is that this hard clay-like soil is incredibly difficult to grow in. And so as new caretakers off of South Shore here, we're only just scratching the surface at our own private residence to say we need to get established before we really dive in. But I'm looking at, we've got some sandy loam soil, and we're looking at, a tree canopy which is different than. And so my encouragement then goes to, if not everyone tries to do everything, but if certain households do something very, very well, could we be producing tree flowers that contribute towards? Could someone be growing garlic and then fermenting it to be black? I mean, can we not just invest in 3 farms on the island, but actually encourage each individual household to contribute, so that when you're missing something, then there is. And I think that's the greater part of the work, which is then just the enthusiasm which says, oh, I do encourage this, right? Because then our food systems here will be gathering for community, which we've done in the past, of under Nelson Pavilion, which says come and eat with us, rather than I love the pub, but rather than insist on food, right? And then that's where our community and our health comes into play.
Yeah, exactly.
So the burning part is going to be something that's really important.
Yeah, and that'll be interesting too.
Yeah.
To see, what result, what happens with that. That's great. Yeah.
And someone else worthwhile to talk to that we've been working with the last few years is Scott Heyman up in the north end, and he's doing a lot with biochar now.
Nice.
Which is pretty excellent, and I'm just beginning to learn about biochar.
Yeah, and I don't know very much about it.
Yeah.
Probably everyone in this room's never even heard that term.
In that
biochar.
So as households here have maybe contributed towards our Giway Key foot corn restoration by providing wood, ash, and galvanized steel, we're considering, how do we take that further? So is it red wigglers and growing out? Is it biochar? Is it creating our own compost at home? So I call Scott Heyman when I'm on the road and ask him where he is in the process. But part of that is he's so willing to have folks that are interested to come and be a part of it.
So explain what biochar is.
Sure. I have such a baseline understanding, Scott. We do such a better job.
You're telling people that don't know anything.
My understanding of biochar is that, so when you have carbonized wood, like Scott's getting this out of his wood stove, he's sifting out the light colored ash, and that goes to us that we make the lye for making our corn. And then the char which is remaining is activated. It can be activated with urine or other different compounds. And it becomes an active charcoal. And then that gets added into the soil. And it's a key for soil building. My other understanding of it is that it's also connected to the...
I think that's us.
Sorry. It's also connected to a lot of the rainforest in the Amazon, and those soils being specifically having been built up by
Yeah.
humans for thousands of years using biochar
Okay.
and controlled burns as part of it.
Yep. That's fascinating, because I know they're doing a lot of that in Sweden too. Yeah.
And then I
That's
think that
cool.
the other resource that
Yeah.
is untapped in our area or very limited is our fisheries.
Right.
I mean, and
Right.
Mike Wiggins was just going over like a couple
Yeah.
years ago how many thousands and thousands of pounds
Yeah.
of fish waste
Yeah.
that could be produced into incredible nitrogen and
Yeah.
fertilizer.
I know, it's amazing. Well, they're doing that in Redcliffe with the Redcliffe fisheries, which are phenomenal. I mean, and that fish is so good. If you're on your way to the island and you're looking to buy a fish, a smoked fish, it's fabulous. But they're using a lot of that fish in their community garden now too, right? The waste and stuff. In fact, Tommy Glazin, who I keep referring to, is a very funny story about that's how he got his garden up and going. Is he'd go down to Bodine's and just take all the fish guts they were throwing away and work it into his garden. To fertilize it, but of course that brought the bears, so they added their own fertilizer, so it worked out pretty well, because again, the ecosystem of
Beth,
the
can I add
neighborhood.
one thing to that? I think it's important to note too, as we talk about exploring biochar, and then creating our own soil health here for our households. It's the exploration of just like when we're cooking, how much is too much salt.
Right.
It's the same with biochar.
Right.
So we can actually burn our soil.
Right.
And we actually learned a bit about that when we added, was it Bad River that we traveled to for fish? Yeah, we had worked with their fishery and brought a whole big truck bed full of two, thank you, and traded for a lot of hominy to contribute to soil. And so I'm wanting to have the ability to test closer to home than having to send it out.
Sure.
And that's something that I don't quite have a grasp on.
Yeah. But that's what we're all doing. It's all experiment, right?
Yeah.
Jay.
This is all fantastic, and I love it, and thank you so much. But I'm a New Yorker, and I grew up thinking that potatoes grew in plastic bags
Yes.
on grocery store shelves.
Yes.
So what can New Yorkers
Right.
do in our cabin to actually help to contribute to
Yeah.
all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, if you're interested in the community garden, come on up. Tommy Glosson has that food truck down in the, he does the farmer's market down at the ferry. Grows great stuff, and you'd be surprised at how much great stuff he grows. There's also a woman down there that sells beef, I think. And then, Darlings is doing a really nice job too. They're bringing way more local stuff. It doesn't all have to come from the island. I mean, again, we're sort of landlocked and we don't have these systems up and going again, right now. But, and we don't have to, like food was, if you go back centuries, even pre-Greek, food was the original currency, okay? And so I never feel bad if I'm buying something from somebody I really like. And if it's really good quality, I'm happy to support that person. Like I said, I'm sort of a better shopper than I am a farmer or grower, So yeah, and there are a lot of people doing really good stuff. So I know if you ever get over to Ashland, there's a wonderful co-op over there. They've got great things, and they're all labeled, and a lot of them are coming from local places. I just think it's, Ayler's sad. I mean, there used to be two really good cheesemakers nearby. Happy Hollow Farm, his friend, his family, they used to sell at the Bayfield Farmers Market. They used to even have, their cheese was so good, it was sheep's milk cheese, and they had it in the IGA. And even though it was like $10 a pound, people in the area were buying it because it was so darn good. I think part of it is when people recognize how good something tastes, they're willing to shell out for it. And just, I think, one of the things I did for a while was the Taste of the Apostles, kayaking adventures, where part of that adventure included that all of the food that we ate when we were on trail and at dinner at night was coming from local sources in Bayfield, surrounded Bayfield, Washburn, Ashland, Plumwood all together. But every night when we cooked dinner, we'd either have one of the farmers come and talk to us about their growing practices. And the last night we went up to Blue Vista Farm, where they were growing organic berries. Now, sadly, that's closed because, again, we need to remember how much pressure people are under to try and make a go of it financially. And I just think that, the more aware we become of what's out there for us, the better we can do, right? Yeah.
Is anybody producing surplus in the community garden that then
Yeah,
sells
yeah, it
it?
goes
I mean,
to-
can we buy it at that
You know,
Friday, Thursday morning?
I think we need to demand that happen, because we do put a lot of it into the food shelf, which is great, but then it gets left there, and by the time it's been there for a while, nobody wants it. So I think we need to become more efficient about that. And I think it would be a really good idea to do that, because those funds could then go back into the church and the food shelf. So yeah, no, I think so, yeah. I mean, that should be happening, and we should have more people that are growing things show up at the farmer's market. So
Tomorrow.
that'd be great.
Tomorrow
Yes,
morning.
tomorrow, thank you, yeah, tomorrow, and Tony gets there, what, around 8:30, I think?
I got
No, he's usually on the 9 o'clock ferry, setting up by 9:30.
Okay.
And then other people are coming from different places as the summer progresses.
Yes.
Okay, we could go on and on.
You guys have been so patient, thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody for coming. I'm gonna just do a quick wrap up of July 23rd is our next